10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 126. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. We are on episode 126. Seems like just yesterday that we started this show, and now we are more than 2.5 years in. So thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into the show, I wanted to let you know that you can get a PDF to every single episode by going over to our Patreon page and signing up to be a supporter of the podcast. You could do that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon links and going over there and showing your support for the show, showing that you listen to it every week and that you get a lot out of this show. We really appreciate the support. Let me give a big shout out to all the people that have chosen to support us over the past week. Thank you to Tim, Valerie, and Matthew for joining the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family and getting your hands on over 126 episodes worth of PDFs. So I want to take a minute and explain to you why you should think about supporting the podcast. Now, I've been approached by a couple of advertisers over the past couple of weeks here, and I've really been trying to decide whether I want to do that. Now, on one hand, that will bring in some much needed income for the show, but on the other hand, I'm a little bit apprehensive because we are so bombarded by advertisements all the time. I almost feel like I shouldn't bring the show into that arena, and it also compromises our ability to be able to kind of talk about whatever we want to if we accept sponsors on this show. So I'd really like to keep it a listener-supported show, and keep in mind, it's only $3 a month to support this podcast, and I know a lot of you out there tune in every single week. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want you to support this show if you can't afford that $3 a month. But if you're somebody who has the means and are able to show that $3 a month in support to us, I encourage you to go over to Patreon, click on the link, and get in on the feeling that you're really making this show happen week in and week out. And again, just a reminder, you do get a lot for that $3 a month. You get a PDF that goes along with every single episode. And if you listen to the show, you're really only getting about 50% of the story. You really want to have that PDF in front of you. And then you can also file it away, because I know I give you a lot of information on this show. You can file it away and then use it at a later date if you'd like. So anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm going to have to make some tough decisions. And one of the things that I honestly wouldn't really like to do is bring on a sponsor, but I may have to make that decision in the future. If you are on the fence about supporting this podcast and you've been thinking about it for a little while, we would really, really appreciate that $3 donation every single month. Just know that you are the folks that keep this podcast coming at you week after week. Okay, so let's get into today's topic. Today we're going to talk about a really, really important chord progression called a backdoor 2-5-1. And this can be really confusing for people. I know that it confused me for a long time, so I wanted to shed a little bit of light on the theory behind this backdoor 2-5-1. And then next week we're going to talk about some strategies to actually play over the backdoor 2-5-1. Today we're going to talk about where it comes from and give you some examples on where you can find some of them. And I have a feeling that some of you have seen these a lot and you just don't know what they're called. You don't know how to characterize this particular progression and ultimately play over it, because that's the goal. With all of our theoretical knowledge, it really has to transfer over to our actual solos, or it's not really worth that much to us. So what is a backdoor 2-5-1? So I would classify a backdoor 2-5-1 as what we call a deceptive cadence, meaning that we get set up to do a regular 2-5-1, which is a kind of what we call perfect cadence. And then all of a sudden, we get kind of faked out, we get deceived at the end of that progression, and it doesn't go where we think it's going to go. So let's use a 2-5 in the key of C, for example. So a regular 2-5-1 would be a D minor 7 to a G7, and that would resolve to C major 7. That is the thing that we are used to. That's the thing that we typically see in most of these cadences that we're going to come across in the tunes that we play. But the back door is a little bit different. So imagine that we had a cadence that went like this: D minor 7 to G7, but resolved to A major 7 instead of C major 7. So now we're talking in the key of A, right? We're no longer in the key of C major anymore because we're ultimately resolving to A, and that would be the key that we're in. So what is this? How does it actually work? So this cadence is really, really interesting because instead of going 2-5-1, what we actually have is we have a 4 minor 7 chord, and that goes to a flat 7-7 chord, and then that resolves to the 1 major 7. So this is a heck of a lot different. It sounds different. It feels different. We have to consider some other things when we're playing over this. But first, I would really like you to just actually hear this cadence. So here is D minor 7 to G7 to A major 7, what we call the backdoor 2-5-1. So you may actually even recognize that sound from some of the tunes that you play over, and you just might not have known what to call it. Well, that is the backdoor 2-5-1. So you'll notice that it's non-diatonic, which is really interesting, right? Because a normal cadence is all diatonic notes, and that's why we call it a perfect or a perfect authentic cadence, is because it stays in the key, and it's the basis of Western harmony, that 5 pulling to 1, right? So this is a little bit different. Now, you could call this modal mixture, right? Because what we're actually doing is we're mixing modes from different keys to create this 2-5-1. Now, we'll talk about what modal mixture is on a future episode of this podcast at some point, but just know that that basic term means that we're sort of borrowing modes from other keys, and we're not staying all in the same key signature. We're not just using modes from the key of the 1 chord, if that makes sense. So this is really a great sound, and it's super interesting, and it's used so much in all forms of music, not just jazz. Stevie Wonder uses this all the time, all over his music. But let's use a couple of examples from jazz tunes. So the first example that I would like to present to you is the Tad Dameron tune called Lady Bird, and there's actually a backdoor 2-5-1 that starts in bar 3 and then finishes up in bar 5. So if we're playing this tune, it starts in the key of C major 7. We have 2 bars of a C major 7 chord. Then we go to F minor 7 to B flat 7. So what that would be if we were continuing with a perfect cadence, that would resolve to E flat major 7, right? But instead it goes backdoor, and it actually brings us back to the C chord, which gives us that 4 minor 7 to flat 7-7 to 1. So here is our backdoor 2-5-1 in the tune Lady Bird. Let's check out what the first 6 measures of that tune sounds like. And you'll hear the chord progression start in measure 3. So you can hear that backdoor progression. It has such an interesting sound to it, and it is a little bit unexpected, which, goes along with the deceptive cadence idea. It's deceiving us. Our ears want it to go one way, and instead it goes another way, which can provide for some really interesting playing and a really interesting chord progression. Okay, so let's look at one more tune just to kind of drive this home. We're going to look at the coda section towards the end in the tune My Foolish Heart. So in My Foolish Heart, in the first measure, we have an F sharp minor chord. And then in the second measure, we get our backdoor cadence. We have D minor 7 to G7, and that resolves to A major 7. So again, we get that minor 4 7 chord, and then that goes to a flat 7 7 chord, and that resolves to 1. So let's check out what it sounds like in My Foolish Heart. So you can hear it has that exact same sound, right? It has the same sound as Lady Bird, only, this is a ballad and it happens in a different part of a tune. But hopefully you're starting to get used to what that backdoor sound actually is. Now, there's tons of tunes out there with this backdoor chord progression. This is only a couple. And I think once you know what it is, you're really going to start to recognize them when you're playing over it. So what we're going to talk about next week is some ways to actually handle this progression, how these chords relate to each other, and I'm going to give you a little bit of vocabulary on how to actually play over this stuff, the relationship between the different notes, because obviously our resolution scheme changes a little bit when we're not dealing with that authentic cadence. So stick around for part 2 next Friday, and we're going to talk about that. All right, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. If any of this was unclear, just shoot me an email, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. And please try to keep in mind the stuff that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. We definitely cannot do this show without your support. And if you have the means to pledge that $3 a month, and you think that you might not even miss it each and every month, you're going to get a ton of value for that small amount of money that you can donate to us. So thanks a lot, everybody. We will see you on Monday with a brand new episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend. Bye.